Hello and welcome, scholars. Just want to take a moment to talk to you a little bit about decision making and creativity when it comes to the organizational structure, when it comes to working with inside the organization, how those areas can be important, and some of the processes that we probably don't realize that we're going through when we're doing that decision making process. So, a rational model for decision making explains how managers should make decisions. The model of decision making assumes that managers are completely objective and possess complete information when making decisions. So, kind of in a perfect vacuum, we have everything that we need to know detail wise to make decisions, and then we make the decision. Of course, this usually isn't how it really works. We don't exist in a vacuum, and therefore we can't really rely on this for a perfect decision every time. If we're in the vacuum, we had all the information, we were being objective, going through these stages would work perfectly, but we usually have imperfect information. We usually have issues with objectivity and gut feelings that kind of impede and throw us off track sometimes with our decision making that may interfere with that. So in general, this is kind of the pattern that we go through, but it's not always highly effective because of the fact that we're not always truly objective. We always don't have all the information needed to make decisions. We kind of have to fill in the blanks in order to make that decision-making process happen. The rationale model is based on the premise that managers optimize when they make decisions, and optimizing is solving problems by producing the best possible solution. So conditions needed to optimize: having complete information, which is always going to be an issue sometimes, leaving emotions out of the decision-making process, being honest and accurate, evaluating all alternatives, having abundant and accessible time and resources, and having people willing to implement and support the decisions. So there's a lot of what ifs kind of in there. There's a lot of, existing in a vacuum to make this work, to make it happen and be effective and efficient. And a lot of times, being able to check off all those boxes is really hard to do. Even, getting half those boxes checked off when it comes to the decision-making process can be tough. So it's important to understand that, we have a lot of these outside forces. There's a lot of things that go into that decision-making process that gives us sometimes incomplete decisions or inaccurate decisions when we are choosing how to move forward. The quality of decisions may be enhanced in the sense that they follow more logically form available knowledge and expertise. It makes the reasoning behind the decision transparent and available to scrutiny. If made public, it discourages the decider from acting on suspect consideration, having that bias come in there, losing the objectivity. So being transparent helps take care of that piece of the puzzle when it comes to trying to make sure we're objective in the decision-making process. So actual decisions are awfully general, non-rational, though. And this is due to the fact that we have incomplete information. We're not always objective. The information that we seek out is, incomplete. It's not really the optimal amount that we want. So most of the time we end up with non-rational decision-making process because we don't have all that information, because we have objectivity issues, because we don't have folks willing maybe to carry out things the way that we want them carried out. So this is different decision-making constraints, including personal characteristics, internal and external resources that reduce rational decision-making. Personal characteristics include personality, limited capacity of the human mind, limitations when it comes to the information given to us. So a lot of things really drive us to non-rational decision-making process a lot of times. Some other things to consider when it comes to that information, kind of that gut feeling or that intuition. So those judgments and insights or decisions that come to mind on their own without an explicit awareness, or the evoking of cues without an explicit evaluation, and being able to validate that. So there's a lot of different ways to take this on. We've got the holistic hunch. So this is a judgment that is based on a subconscious integration of information stored in memory. Automated experiences, so a choice that is based on familiar situation, just automatic that we choose it because of the situation and past experience with it. And intuition is represented by two distinct processes. So one is automatic, involuntary, and mostly effortless, while the second is controlled, voluntary, and effortless. And so a lot of this has to do with the knowledge presented to us and our past experiences as well when we enter that decision-making process and that kind of map that we go through subconsciously when we're doing that kind of decision-making tree in our head, when we're doing those steps and maybe not realizing it or kind of, putting these formal definitions or theories to it, but it's something that we're always doing when we're making decisions in our daily life. So evidence is used in 3 different ways to make decisions to inform a decision and to support it as well. So evidence is used to make a decision whenever the decision follows directly from the evidence. Evidence is used to inform a decision whenever the decision process combines hard objective facts with qualitative input such as intuition and bargaining with stakeholders. And evidence is used to support a decision whenever the evidence is gathered or modified for the sole purpose of lending legitimacy to the decision that has already been used. So using that evidence to justify that decision-making process, making sure we don't apply bias to it, that we're objective as possible, making sure that evidence, we're not making it fit our decision-making that we actually made, that we're not making it fit to show that our decision was right. So there's 4 kind of decision-making styles that we can think about. So a decision-making style is how an individual perceives and comprehends stimuli and the general manner in which he or she chooses to respond to such information. So we've got decision-making styles vary along 2 different dimensions: value orientation and tolerance for ambiguity. So value orientation reflects the extent to which an individual focuses on either task or technical concerns or people and social concerns when making a decision. And then tolerance, we've got, represents the extent to which a person has a high need for structure or control in his or her life. So when we look at the chart here, we can kind of gauge that we've got these 4 boxes, and depending on what our tolerance is and our value orientation kind of drives us to how we approach decision making, kind of drives us to which process we may tend to use in that decision making, and depending on the situation might drive us to one of these decisions as well. But it kind of puts us into one of these boxes depending on where we fall. So we've got the directive. So this is people with this style have low tolerance and are oriented towards tasks and technical concerns when making decisions. So they really want the numbers. They want to be able to justify the decisions. They want as much information as possible. Analytical, so this style has much higher tolerance and is characterized by the tendency to overanalyze the situation. Conceptual, so people with this style have a high tolerance and tend to focus on the people or social aspects of the work situation. And behavioral, people with this style work well with others and enjoy social interactions with opinions are openly exchanged. So it does some different drivers that go into that decision-making process that we may use that we're kind of mapping out in our head, and we don't realize that we're doing it because it's something that we've always done in our lives. It's our past experience. It's our, our traits, our characteristics that are driving us into one of these boxes. Next, we have group decision making. So we've got some advantages and disadvantages when it comes to this. So a lot of times we can think about this in a sense of groupthink as well, where we've got that groupthink where people maybe aren't suggesting solutions to problems that exist because they're trying to be part of the group. They're trying to belong to this group function. A major one of these decision-making breakdowns because of groupthink was the Challenger explosion. There was a group of people came together. There's a couple of voices that were against letting the Challenger take off that morning because it was so cold. They didn't think the O-rings would close. They were kind of shouted down by the rest of the group members. And then eventually they wanted to be part of the group and they wanted to be seen kind of as a team player. So they kind of started to be quiet. They didn't interject as much. They started to pull back away from some of their objections. They wanted to start, going along with the group, if you will. And then we had the Challenger explosion because, those outside voices were right in their opinion and, what they were presenting. But they ended up kind of being shouted down, and kind of this groupthink took over where they wanted to be part of that group, where they wanted to kind of coalesce with that group and stop standing out away from the group. So groupthink can be very dangerous. So when we're thinking about team projects and trying to solve problems and be creative with teams, we need to understand there's some drawbacks when it comes to that, especially when it comes to ideas and people being heard within the group. Some creativity outcomes. So creativity requires motivation and dominant relevant knowledge. In other words, people need to be motivated to apply their knowledge and capabilities to create new ideas, new products, and solutions to all sorts of problems. Other diverse in creativity include the big five personality dimensions. So self-efficacy, national culture, willingness to tolerate ambiguity, and proactive personality. And then depending on the situation as well, that could really drive our creativity, how we look at creativity, and whether or not we feel boxed in or we feel like we're allowed to be creative, we're allowed to problem solve, we're allowed to think outside the box and come up with interesting and new solutions to problems that exist. So I just wanted to give you a very high level idea, some things to think about when it comes to decision making, creativity. Some of those formal processes that we're going through in the decision making process, we just don't realize it. We're not applying theories in our head. We're not labeling it in our head as we're going through the decision making process. But this is some of the maps that we're actually going through subconsciously that we're actually taking on when we're trying to decide what to do. And of course, in a perfect world, having all the information and the willingness of others to take on that decision and act on that decision with you, with your guidance, everything would be perfect. We'd have those 4 stages. But a lot of times our decision making isn't rational, it's non-rational, because we don't have all the information. We don't have all the resources in the world when we make decisions, and we have to use the best of what we have available to us to make decisions. And then depending on our characteristics, depending on the situation, it's kind of going to drive what type of map we use, kind of, what box am I going to use? I want a lot of hard facts and information, and I want to, have a lot of the analytical stuff in order to make that decision. Or if I'm comfortable with missing a lot of stuff, I'm comfortable with my gut feeling, I'm comfortable with thinking about the situation, the people around me, the task around me in that decision-making process, and less concerned with hard numbers driving me to make a decision one way or the other. So there's some ideas to think about when we're thinking about decision making and creativity in the workplace, and remembering some downsides to teamwork when it comes to groupthink and some of those voices being shouted down or mended into the group and not standing out with some really good ideas possibly, or some concerns that need to be listened to. Thank you for watching today, guys. Greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you later.